Welcome to this episode of the Gunman. So this video here is part 10 on my VL Turbo project. So in this video we're going to be getting the body repaired and primed and inside of this boot lid painted at the same time. I'll be including the masking stages and giving you guys as much info as I can on all the products and the systems that I'm using. So this was on the Saturday morning that I came in. I kind of just thought, oh, you know what, I might just get another panel ready because I needed to get the boot lid done. But as it turned out, I got a little bit carried away and just ripped right into it and decided, you know what, I'm pulling it off the road and I'm going to get it repaired and painted in the one weekend. Even the mechanic next door, he said, mate, I saw the car all together and half an hour later I looked back and it was all in bits, all your parts were off. So I really just ripped into it and had a massive weekend. This day here was a 12.5 hour day. I was at work at 5:30 and I didn't leave until 6 o'clock that night. So once I got all the parts off, first thing was to tackle the worst of it, which was the rust around this rear windscreen. I'm just using my mini grinder, which has got a piece of 40 grit on it. Great little tool this, gets into all the little hard to reach spots that a normal angle grinder won't, and also a normal angle grinder will probably cut into your steel a little bit too much, whereas this is not quite as aggressive. You can replace that by something like a wire brush or a wire wheel on a drill if you don't have one of these, but if you're going to tackle jobs like this, I really do highly recommend grabbing one of these tools. They're not too expensive. The discs are called the Roll-Lock discs from 3M. There are other brands on the market that are exactly the same and they're around $1 per disc. As you can see here, there was a little bit of rust around the front windscreen as well, so I just gave that a good grind back, and this is a look at the rust converter that I've got. It's a water-based product, so it does take a little time to dry. However, I just put that on, started on my repairs, and then I force dried it. So I got my air blower, blew away any of the liquid parts, and then got a bit of a heat gun onto it, and it was dry enough to fiberglass over within a few hours. It's probably not really recommended. If this was a customer's car, I probably would have put it on and then maybe left it at least overnight, but I just really did want to rip in and get this done because I've still got a living to make and I do have other customers' cars that I have to work on. That is why I did this car on the Saturday and Sunday. And in this case, I just decided to brush it on. You can also put it into a little trigger sprayer and get up into all of those spots that you can't get with the brush. The only real downside of doing a car in such a rush like what I did here is shrink back, and I did get a little bit of shrink back unfortunately, but it's something that I'm just going to have to live with. I did end up flow coating the entire car too, so I feel like I'm actually playing a little bit of catch up with these videos. They do not edit themselves and they do take a lot of time and effort to make, so I'm just getting stuck into it and going to take you guys through the entire job. So once I've got that on, the next job was to get my body filler repairs done. There was a couple of high spots, nothing too major on that quarter panel. I got a hammer and dolly, bashed the high spots down, and then just put a bit of filler into it. Same with up on this rear windscreen pillar area here, just above that quarter glass. Just a couple of high spots that I'm just hitting into a low spot and put some filler on. That's the kind of panel beater I am. Make it into a dent and bog it up. Now you can see where I've sanded into that roof area there, and I've opened up layers and layers of paint. That is actually what was shrinking back on me. So yep, in a perfect world I would have paint stripped or sandblasted the entire car and I would have had a even playing field to start off with, and none of that shrink back would have happened. I also would have primed it up and left it for at least a week or given it a really good bake out before I went and painted over it. So all that shrinking back will happen before you put your base coat color on. So next up I'm putting my bog in, or Bondo as they call it in America, or just body filler. I think that's a pretty universal name for it. So just making sure I get it in nice and tight. The nicer you get those edges in, obviously it's going to be easier to sand out, and sometimes if you get it in too thick, well then you just be sanding and sanding, you'll actually ruin the paint around it and rip into it too much. A couple of tips that I will give you for when you're doing bog like this over paint, which isn't really recommended, but if you do it, then you want to finish it off with 180 grit before you prime over it. If I've done it in the past and say had a few 80 scratches left, and that's also going to be a couple of bits that will shrink back, but do your best to minimize it by going to 180 grit. Any finer and you'll actually run the risk of taking too much of that filler out and ruining your repair. So I've found 180 is the perfect grit. Drying times for your bog will vary greatly by the day and the amount of hardener that you've put in. If it's a really warm day, sometimes you have it go off as you're putting it in if you put a touch too much hardener in. So, you know, just put a little bit less in on those warmer days and put a touch more in. You don't want to go and put too much more in because it'll actually stay real cheesy and it'll go hard, but then it won't actually go rock hard. So it'll stay a little bit gummy. But on this roof here, I ended up finding, when I was sanding it down, so I got my filler in and then I started sanding the rest of the car down, just prepping it up for primer. And I found a few little bubbles. They just didn't look right. And as it turned out, there was an old filler repair here, which maybe they had a little bit of moisture or water on the panel before they put their filler in. And then it just started lifting up off the metal. Fortunately, there wasn't any rust under there, which is what I was expecting. But I was just able to grind that back, put a bit more filler in, do a bit of a repair there, and prime over it, and happy days. I actually really love working on my own cars because I can cut as many corners as I want, I can do it as rough as I want, or I can do it as good as I want. And I just get stuck into it, just have a big weekend, and just, yeah, do as much as I can, get those tunes cranking, have a couple of ciggies, and yeah, this is what work's all about to me, actually enjoying it. So I sped this application of this filler up just to double speed, just to stop the vid from getting too long, and it makes it easier for me to narrate because I don't have to sit here talking to myself for as long either. And once this filler's in, the previous section of filler that I had put in, I was able to go back to, and that was dry enough for me to start sanding. So the sanding procedure I used on this car for my filler repairs was to give it a quick sand off with an old piece of 80 grit, just with the orbital, because I found a very top layer of bog just goes a little bit cheesy, and it can sometimes ruin your piece of sandpaper straight away, and it just clogs it up. So I just rip that top layer off with the orbital with a bit of 80, and then I go over it with the block that you see me using here. This is just the 3M block, good quality block and good sandpapers as well. So they last a fair while, and once I got the 80 grit finished off, I just went over it with 180 grit on this same block, and then I used the 180 grit on the orbital sander with a soft back sanding sponge just to remove any of those 80 grits that I may have missed. Obviously being careful with the orbital sander that you don't dig into your repairs too much, because it is when you can ruin a repair after you've blocked it down, and if you decide to go over it with the orbital, you can dig into it too much and take too much of that filler out again. Still never forget the first job I was ever told to get ready for primer. They just gave me the orbital sander, a bit of 240 grit, and they said feather that out. And I absolutely ruined this whole quarter panel. I was taking out the big 80 grit scratches. I didn't really quite grasp exactly what was going on, and I took way too much filler out, and the panel beater had to redo the repairs. But hey, you learn from your mistakes, and that was definitely a learning experience for me at the age of 17 when I just started my apprenticeship back there in Melbourne. When you're doing this kind of stuff on a customer's car, it probably couldn't hurt to throw a piece of plastic over the interior, but the interior on this car is really quite rat shit, and it really was not worth covering. I'll just be happy with getting an airline in there once the job's done and blowing out any of the dust. I may end up putting a couple of seat covers over it later, but at the end of the day I may not, because I am just selling the car. I'm moving over to Thailand in December. If all goes to plan, I'll be starting up a custom painting centre with a Canadian guy who I actually met through this YouTube channel. So that's been great, and I'm really looking forward to the next chapter. Don't worry guys, the videos won't be going anywhere. I have actually got loads and loads of footage of jobs that I've just never actually got around to editing. So at the start I may get back to editing some of those videos, and yeah, once we get our feet on the ground and set up over there, there'll definitely be loads more cool custom work videos coming your way soon. So if anything, the channel is going to be actually better once I'm over there, and hopefully I'll get a little bit more time to make even more videos. So as I was saying before, I'm just going over the rest of those repairs with the 180 grit on the orbital sander, and I'm using the interface pad on that too. So even around those tail light areas, there was big build-ups of paint where they just masked up those trims and hadn't even taken them off. So just giving them a good feather out so you can no longer feel the edge. And there was a couple of stone chips here and there, which I just put a bit of filler in. Sometimes you're better off putting filler into chips if you're doing it this way rather than sanding them out, because if you sand them out, then you're opening up more and layers of paint, and you'll be increasing your risk of more of that shrink back that I was talking about before. So now most of those repairs are under control. It's looking quite nice. It's feathered out quite finely there. Haven't got any big 80 grit scratches that are gonna possibly fry up and cause mega shrink back. I'm getting out the fiberglass filler here. So this is a U-Pole product. I'm sure there's loads of different ones on the market, and I've got no doubt that they would all be quite similar products. So it's basically just a polyester resin, and they've put some fiberglass particles in with it. You can actually make your own. If you go down to a boat builder or a resin sales place, you'll be able to buy the fiberglass and the resin and make your own to your own consistency if you really want to. But these ones here, they just take normal bog hardener, so the BPO hardeners that you get in your normal bogs. So it's quite easy, and they dry really quickly, so similar drying times to your bog, and it goes really hard. It does go a little bit harder than bog, so it's a great product, and I do recommend using this over normal bog on any rust repairs. It just seems to hold in there a bit longer, and it'll prolong that repair. Look, it's not really a repair that's going to last forever. I'm not expecting that, but the boot is not going to be full of water every time it rains anymore. My uncle, who was probably one of the best restoration panel beaters, or even just smash panel beaters that I've ever worked with, he had a good old saying that he used to say. He'd say, "The manufacturer cannot build a car that can't rust. How do you expect me to repair something and it not rust back?" Because he had a customer come back, it was probably 3 or 4 years after he'd done his repairs, and there was a bit of a rust bubble coming back up. He's like, "Mate, what do you want me to do about it? You know, you're gonna have to pay me to refix it, because I did my best the first time." Whether or not he cut it out and welded it, or he did a fiberglass repair, but it was all agreed to by the customer. He took every procedure that he could to make sure it wasn't going to come back, but at the end of the day, cars rust. So with this rear windscreen area, it turns out that I did have to actually reapply, because it was fairly far gone. It was a decent sized rust hole, especially on the left side there. I got it in, let that harden up, and then reapply a little bit more fiberglass filler, and did some bog over the top of that fiberglass filler, as you can see here. Still not quite perfect, but a lot of that is covered by the rubber, and I did give it a good prime and sanded it back the next morning. So there you go. This is mainly ready for the booth now. I ended up going around all those edges just with a 320 grit soft back sanding sponge to make sure there's no shinies left. You could also use, say, a bit of red Scotch-Brite just to get rid of all those shiny edges. Red Scotch-Brite's usually pretty fine for primer, but for paintwork you'd probably want to go for the grey Scotch-Brite. So in between all that, I was obviously doing this boot lid as well, so I prepped that up inside and out. I had a few filler repairs on the outside, and just prepped the inside up with 400 grit. Gave it a good sand down with the orbital, because it had been done before. There was actually some big runs in there, and also lots of bits of stuff and crap that had landed in their clear coat. So that's actually another advantage of using these sanding sponges, where a bit of Scotch-Brite wouldn't actually remove those bits of crap that landed in it. This sanding sponge actually will knock out most of the orange peel and any of those bits of crap. Anyway, as you can see, I've hung that boot lid up on the stand so that I can paint inside at the same time as priming the outside. And I've gone around and got the car ready, giving it a good blow off with the duster gun, and going around and doing my masking. Again, this is sped up to 2 times speed just to stop the vid from getting too long. If you would like to see more of the masking techniques and all that kind of stuff, I do have my other channel, the Gunman Raw, so check that out if you'd like to just get some more technique videos into you. There's no narration and a low amount of editing. Sometimes I do a touch of editing, put a bit of music in there or something, but the most of it is unedited raw footage. I came up with the idea when I was editing a video and it was just really starting to do my head in. I thought, you know what, they can do it. If they want to see it, they can skip through and they can pick up what I'm doing just by watching. And hey, it's getting quite popular. People are really starting to like it. So as you obviously noticed, I decided to leave the front windscreen in. Main reason, as I mentioned in the previous video, which was remove and refit the rear windscreen. Main reason is because it is urethane in and it's a bit of a major to pull out. I wouldn't want to do it myself. I would have had to have paid over $150 to get it removed and refit and a new rubber put in, so I decided just to mask it up. And you may have noticed that trim tape that I was using there. It's great stuff. It's got the hard plastic edge on it and it enables you to lift that rubber up. You can actually replace that by a thin rope or even a bit of speaker wire. Actually does the job quite well sometimes around those rubbers. Lift it up, put the speaker wire under there, and then you can go and put your tape on over the top. Masking is one of those jobs that I actually really enjoy. I probably enjoy it just as much as painting nearly, because I'm good at it. I've had a lot of practice. You can just sit there with the booth open, listen to your music. It's not like it's hard labor or anything. And yeah, it's just cutting out and taping down. When masking for primer, it's pretty important that you think about the sanding stage, which is going to be the next day. A good mask and a bad mask can mean hours and hours of sanding. So if you go and mask a hard line on an inside edge, so an interior, a convex edge, it's going to be really hard to get that sandpaper in there to sand it. But say on a convex or an exterior angle, if you mask a hard line there, because it's on that exterior angle, it's already on a sharp point. You just got to be able to run over that 1 or 2 times with the sandpaper. It's going to cut straight through that edge and you'll be sanding the car down in no time. So yeah, just be careful of getting that masking right when you do your primer masking. I prefer to use plastic most of the time when I'm masking. However, paper still does have its place. If you get the piece of plastic over, and say if you're doing a 4-wheel drive and you've covered one side, but the wheels and say the sill panel or something might still be uncovered, yep, then you use some paper over it. If you feel more comfortable covering the entire car with paper, then who am I to tell you not to? But I do recommend giving this a shot, because although it may take a little bit of getting used to at the start, once you master it, you will actually notice it's easier to mask. So you've got actually less chance of getting overspray, because if you go over it with paper and then you put your plastic up underneath there, there's a little bit of an area it can creep up, and you're also sort of double masking it, whereas with this, you're just going straight over the plastic, cutting it out, and then putting the tape straight over from the plastic to the area that you're wanting to mask down. You may notice I'm doing quite a few just straight hard edges as well, so they are actually quite easy to sand out. You make sure they're right on that edge. As I said before, they're going to sand out really easily. I find there's no real need to go and get too fancy with all that soft edging like I do if I'm, say, to paint a door opening and I'm not painting the quarter panel, or vice versa, and you want your paint to blow under there without getting an edge. It's not such a big deal getting a bit of an edge in your primer wear, because if it's in the right spot, it's not going to be too hard to sand out. Once I'm happy I've got it all masked up, I'll obviously go over and recheck my work, look for any edges that I have got wrong, any openings, any spots that I'm going to be getting overspray. Obviously those windscreens are pretty important. You don't want to be going and getting overspray all over your screens or your rubbers. But yeah, I'm happy with where it's at now, and it's about time to mix up my primer. If you really want, you could wipe it down with some Prepsol or wax and grease remover, but I've found it's really not necessary, and it's the way I was taught not to Prepsol your putty ups, because body filler is porous, so it will go and suck in all that Prepsol. You don't really want to be going and trapping Prepsol solvents into your body filler, and it's very rare that you get bad fish eyes or any reactions from your primer work. So the primer that I'm using is Concept HS Primer, good quality primer. I'm just making sure that I'm putting that first coat on sort of medium wet. If you put it on too heavy, you'll probably increase the risk of getting shrink back and fry ups. Another advantage is that because it's that little bit thinner, it's going to be drying a bit quicker. So most of the time, depending on the size of the job, obviously, by the time you got that first coat on everything, you'll just about be right to go back around to where you first started and put your second coat on, your wet coat. So I like to go first 2 coats over the repairs. So go your medium wet coat first, then go a heavy coat over your repairs, then thin it down a touch and put 2 more coats over the entire thing. So eventually at the end your repairs have got sort of 3.5 coats over them and the rest of it's got 2 over it. But again, job by job, that will vary out of what you're looking for out of that job. I knew that I wasn't going to be blocking this entire car down. It was just a quick sand down and paint, and the main reason I primed the entire car is so that I'm not going to be getting shrink back, and I'm not going to be getting chips going back down to the red when it does eventually get stone chipped or something like that. But if I was looking for maybe slightly better results, then I could have put, say, an extra coat over the entire thing and then given it a good block back with some 180 the next day. And that would have made it a lot straighter. But look, there is still a few ripples in this car. I'm not claiming it's any show car. I just think it's cool to work on my own car, as I said before, and it's cool to have the world or you guys following. I've been doing another VL Commodore in at work recently for a customer, and that one is just about show car spec. Well, it's going to be. He said it. He's going to be taking it to shows. He wants it to look absolutely perfect. Now, I could be editing all that footage up and showing you guys like the top quality work I could be doing, but you know what, I'd rather be editing this video footage of my own car, and it's not perfect, but it's my car. So anyway, I thinned down a little bit of that primer for the inside of that boot, so I had a little bit of that just normal primer left over from painting the rest of the car. Thin that down and then just put 1 coat over all that red just to cover up that red, and any chips, obviously it's going to hopefully just go to the primer rather than to the red. And then all I literally did is clean the gun out. By the time the gun was cleaned out, came back over and it was right to go straight back onto with my base coat. Didn't take that long. It wasn't exactly a cold day, it was probably around 20-23 degrees. And being that the primer had fast hardener in it and quite a bit of reducer, that obviously helped it dry out too. This colour here is 2B053 is the colour code. Panorama Silver is the name of it. I'm using it in Chromax base coat, or DuPont, otherwise known as DuPont. That's a 3:1 ratio, and it's got really good coverage. I regret not using Chromax on that other VL Calais. It's a gold one. You may have seen a few pics going around on Instagram of me doing the work on that, but I used that in Standox, and that was absolutely terrible coverage. It took like 4 coats and it was just covered with 4, but this one here was like visually covered in 2, and you just put your 3rd coat on as your tech coat, then you're ready for clear. As you may have noticed, I was using my DeVilbiss SGK, which I honestly believe is probably the best gun on the market. If you take everything into consideration, I believe it's the best gun on the market, mainly on price, but the gun sprays like a $500 or $700 or $800 spray gun. It's absolutely amazing. I painted a Skyline bonnet in it today, and I got killer results out of it, and I thought to myself, man, if I can get the finish like that out of any gun, I'm happy. But there you go, this is what I got up to the following day. So the Saturday was what you just seen in the this entire video, and this is where I got up to after the end of the Sunday, and I was quite happy with the progress I made. Come up quite nice for a 2-day respray. Be leaving that for a week, flow coating it, and then putting it all back together the following week. Lots of dust in here, but I knew that was going to happen. That's just to do with where it is in the booth. My air comes in up that end and flows down here, so when I'm painting the body, all my overspray is landing on this panel, but being that I'm flow coating it, it's not a big deal. I'll make sure I place it up underneath that fan when I do flow coat it. Might be able to squeeze it in with another job next week. So there you go, that's it for this episode. Hope you've enjoyed watching it. Check out these other couple of vids at the end if you've missed them. Thanks for watching, and this has been another Gunman production.